Hi students, welcome to week 6. We are in the home stretch now. 6, 7, and 8 is all you have left in this term. So let's go over what we looked at last week. We looked at the structure of DNA and how it is replicated. We also looked at mitosis, the type of cell division. For example, in your skin cells go through mitosis absolutely every day. There's an estimate that you slough off 40,000 skin cells every day. How about that? That's an interesting fact. You also looked at the job of DNA, which is transcription and translation, where DNA is used to make all the proteins that cells need and organisms need in all of their cells. And most of these proteins that are produced are enzymes which run chemical reactions. So that's what you learned about last week. This week, you're going to learn about sexual reproduction and the process called meiosis. You're going to learn about inheritance patterns with Gregor Mendel's chapter number 12, and you will also take a look at biodiversity. I know that some of you are looking at biodiversity in your final project, so this should be an interesting week. The chapters this week are 11, which is all about meiosis and sexual reproduction, 12, which is inheritance patterns, and 47, which is on biodiversity. So biodiversity is a measure of how many different species are in a particular ecosystem and how many individuals of each species are in that ecosystem. And there are measures for the health of ecosystems based on biodiversity. And there are different formulas that are used to take these measurements of types of species and how many of each species. You need to read Module 6 for this week and watch the videos. There's one on meiosis, which will help you understand that process better. Meiosis is a type of cell division where the chromosome number is reduced, and this is very important for a lot of organisms, especially all those organisms that do sexual reproduction. So for example, in human beings, every one of our cells contains 46 chromosomes, which come in 23 pairs, and each of the pairs of chromosomes comes from your parents. So you get one of a pair that comes from your mother and one of the pair that comes from your father. Well, you start out with 46 chromosomes in a cell, but if you're going to reproduce, you can't put 46 and 46 together because that's going to make 92, and that's way too many chromosomes. So your sex cells, either your sperm or your eggs, go through a cell division called meiosis where the chromosome number is reduced to 23. So when an egg and a sperm come together, then they produce 46 chromosomes in this new zygote or fertilized egg. You'll also watch a video on epigenetics. It's a tale of two mice, which is a good video. I like it a lot. Epigenetics. So I'm going to get into that in just a minute to give you a further explanation of it. But epigenetics is how your genes are really controlled, how they're turned on and turned off. Okay, so for your discussion board postings this week, you're going to talk about epigenetics and that video that you were supposed to watch, The Tale of Two Mice. And how has that changed your understanding of genetics after you watched that video and studied a little bit about epigenetics? You're also going to get into the nature versus nurture argument. That's not exactly the way that the discussion board is worded, genes versus environment. So what controls who you are or what you are as an organism? Is it mainly your genes or is it mainly your environment? And this is the old nature versus nurture argument. This has been going on for a really long time, especially after we figured out what genes were and what DNA was. So you're going to get into a discussion of that. Is it your genes which determine what you're going to be like as a human being? Is it only your genes that determines what you will be like? And if that's the case, then you don't have any say in what happens to you, do you? Or is it your environment? Does a nurturing, caring environment help you overcome some of the bad genes that you have? Does a a violent, horrible life situation make you become something that you wouldn't have become based on your genes. So it's the nature versus nurture in discussion or controversy or just philosophy, because which is it? Which is more important? Are they both important? Let's see what you come up with. So those you will discuss in your response posts. Then in your journal entry, you're going to be discussing how bacteria reproduce, and I have given you a heads up here in chapter 22, section 2. You find out how bacteria reproduce, so go straight to that section to help you answer how bacteria reproduce. Don't just Google it. Please use your textbook. OpenStax, free textbook. I'm telling you exactly where to go, so use that to help you. You're going to talk about asexual reproduction and the advantages and disadvantages of it, and sexual reproduction through meiosis. What are the advantages and disadvantages of sexual reproduction? There are some on both sides. And how does sexual reproduction lead to biodiversity? And I'll show you a slide on that in just a second. You'll also be discussing genetic erosion in agriculture. And what this means is that we're losing lots of variations in organisms, everything from crop plants to livestock, etc. Even something like banana trees, because we're choosing very particular species and subspecies to grow or to produce in agriculture, and so we are losing variety in these organisms. You could also discuss heirloom varieties in here, and there are seed banks, and there's lots of information on this. It's really interesting. Plus, now with more of the organic movement and local farms and local produce that we all like to purchase, there's more variety that you see right now than you have in a long time. And so we're sort of changing the tide here of genetic erosion in agriculture, I think. And then finally, you need to work on your slides for the final project. Don't leave this until next week. Please don't do that. Please work on it this week and then work on it next week. If you're also taking the lab for this course, next week will also be very intense. You have your final project due for the lab. So please work on your slides this week. Take a look at that rubric, see what you need to do. This whole presentation that you're going to make for your final project is in the form of slides, like PowerPoint slides, and you haven't done this, so not with milestone 1 and milestone 2 that are just finished grading. So be sure and work on that project. Okay, let's move on to some of the specific subjects that I just want to touch on. So here's a picture of the Duggar family. They've been on TV for a long time now. 19 kids and counting. I don't know. I can't remember the name of the show. But the whole point of this, you see what the title of the slide is, the importance of sexual reproduction. The importance of sexual reproduction is that you get variety in your offspring, even if you have 19 children. None of them are the same. None of them are the same. You notice that you're not the same as your siblings unless you have an identical twin. Of course, that's different. But you have the same 2 biological parents in this case, and you get all different types of offspring with many different personalities and characteristics in general, how they look, how they act, preferences, all that sort of thing. So that's the importance of sexual reproduction. You get lots of variety in your offspring. Another thing that I want to emphasize, and this goes along with chapter 12 and Mendelian inheritance, is that the genes that you have, so those segments of DNA that you have that code for something, code for traits. And here I give you 3 examples of albinism. Boy, couldn't get that out. Albinism, which is a lack of pigmentation in your skin. That's one recessive trait. Marfan syndrome is what I'm showing you in the middle slide. And this is a characteristic where you grow very large, very tall. You have very big hands and feet. But Marfan syndrome does have a very deadly effect in a lot of people who have Marfan syndrome, and that is the tendency for the aorta to split and bleed out. Your aorta is the main artery that you have leaving your heart, and so of course that is a lot of the time deadly. And then we have sickle cell anemia, and here are some sickled out red blood cells that we have in the bottom right hand corner. That's also a recessive trait, as is albinism, and Marfan syndrome is a dominant trait. So all of this is interesting. There are 3 different traits that are based on 3 singular genes. And so when we study genetics and traits, we are looking at the DNA to see what's going on there. So that's interesting too. If you are taking the lab too, you will realize that you'll be doing a bunch of problems for these coming weeks on traits. Biodiversity is terribly important because, like I said, it's how many different species you have in an ecosystem and how many individuals of each of those species you have. And why is that so important? Because every species fills a niche. And a niche is a role that it plays in that ecosystem. It's a food source. It's the habitat where the species lives. It's predator-prey interactions, that sort of thing. So biodiversity is tremendously important for keeping ecosystems healthy. When we lose biodiversity in any ecosystem, we disrupt the balance of that ecosystem, and we will have detrimental consequences. We can do this in lots of different ways. We can strip away the habitat. I mean, what's happening in the Amazon rainforest right now, deforestation. We can introduce invasive species. I know I battle that even in my own yard. I have a terrible sort of a shrub called a privet, and it has been growing throughout all my yard, and I've been trying my best to get rid of it because it is an invasive species that just takes over your space. But also in the South, we have things like kudzu and, oh my goodness, so many other things. I just think fire ants, murder hornets that we've been hearing about lately. So we have that too. So there are lots of ways that we decrease biodiversity just by human activities and the crazy things that we do. And we need to keep biodiversity. And then epigenetics, I wanted to mention this. Epigenetics, epi means above the genetics, above the genes. So this is control of the genes. If you think about it for just a second, you have the genes in every cell in your body that codes for every trait that you have or need. Every trait. But does a skin cell need the genes that make it a heart muscle cell? No, it doesn't. Does it have the genes for heart muscle cells? Yes, it does. So there's something going on here. If all of the information that you need to be a human being is located in every single cell, then what makes a skin cell, a brain cell, a brain cell, a liver cell, etc.? It's epigenetics. It's the control of the genes. Is turning on and turning off genes when you need them to turn on and turn off. Another example of this, you get a cut on your finger. Okay, then how does your body know to repair that damage? Because of epigenetics, turning genes on and off. Those skin cells, that underlying tissue right there, the connective tissue underneath, doesn't need to repair itself as long as there's no damage. But when there's damage, then all kinds of signals are sent out to the surrounding cells that are still healthy to help speed up the healing of that particular damage that you have to your finger, that cut on your finger, so that it will close up so that your body's not open to pathogens, and it makes that tissue stronger in the form of scar tissue so that it won't break open again. So epigenetics is very, very important. It's a tremendously active field of research right now because, yes, we know a lot about the genes in different species, but boy, we don't know very much about epigenetics, how those genes are turned on and off. We're learning more every single day, and this is a tremendously important field in genetics. Okay, I hope that you have an awesome week. Oh, I forgot this. Let me say this. Nature versus nurture. I have a video, and I'll link that in the announcement so that you can watch this video about identical twins that were separated at birth. And I did mention this in the slides. Nature versus nurture. So nature is your genes. Do your genes determine who you are as an organism? Is that all that matters? Is it just your genes? If it's just your genes, then you don't have any choice about anything. Is it nurture? Does your environment determine everything about you as an organism? Now, of course, we know that's not true because your genes determine how tall you are and what you look like. And this is just talking about human beings. Your genes determine some of your personality traits. But does environment influence your genes? Good question. If you're interested in this, watch this video that I will have linked in the announcements, identical twins separated at birth, because of course when you start out as identical twins, you have exactly the same DNA. It does modify over time, which is very interesting if the two individuals are in different environments. And of course they are, because I mean, even if one of you goes to the grocery store and the other one doesn't, you've changed your environment a little bit. So take a look at the video if you're interested in this, because this is some pretty cool information about these identical twins who were separated at birth. Now, I hope you have a wonderful week. I'm here for you. If you need me, please send me an email message. I will be glad to talk you through any kind of problem that you're having. We can work on it. Just let me know. Have a great week.